The first one ever to use the clicker here, so we'll see how it goes.
Drum roll, please.
So, and thank you all so much for coming. I'm Trish Rudds. I work here at the library. And Courtney, thank you so much for coming. The folks at Eastern Highlands Health District, can't get all those words out.
It's a tongue twister.
Yeah, have been fantastic doing a lot of programs here, the COVID clinics. So thank you so much for talking about this because it's definitely an issue for us in Bolton. So
Yes. Yes, so hi, I'm Courtney. I'm one of the public health nurses at Eastern Highlands Health District, which it's kind of fine print, but at the bottom we covered 10 towns in this area of Connecticut, one being Bolton. So we've been reaching out to all of our towns and going to the libraries and senior centers to do this, in large part because we're seeing the largest amount of reported Lyme disease and babesiosis that we've ever seen before. So we will touch kind of a little bit on that, but mainly, this is just to get awareness out and like how to, the biggest thing is prevention, how to prevent disease. We can't prevent the ticks, they're end game here, but we can certainly prevent, hopefully getting sick from it. So at any point you have a question or whatnot, just, flag me. It's pretty basic, but it's interesting. All right. So what are ticks? This is interesting actually because they're not an insect. A lot of people think they're an insect, but they're actually part of the spider family. Do you know how many legs spiders have? Close, really close, 8. Oh gosh, that would be even worse. But yeah, so they're relative to the spiders. They're an arachnid is their official name. So they have 8 legs in their later stages of life. One of the biggest takeaways in terms of ticks is that they need blood at every cycle of their life to survive, which isn't a lot, but that's 3 meals. It usually takes about 2 years for them to get through all the cycles, but without blood, they die. So it's important if we can, as a population, to help prevent them from getting to that next life cycle. They prefer the wooded and brushy areas, hence why this area of Connecticut is so popular for ticks, because we are more rural, so they like to hang out in the long grass and the side of trails. Another key takeaway is they don't just bite you and transmit, they need 36 to 48 hours to be attached to you to get their full meal. So generally speaking, in terms of Lyme disease, they need to be attached for a while before they're going to transmit the disease. It's not immediate. So how do they find us? They, as I said, like the long grass, they know where we are. They pick grass specifically around well-walked paths. They can detect our odor, our breath, our vibrations. I mean, they have it all down. Like, they know what to do. They cannot jump. They cannot fly. They usually do something called quest, where they take their lower legs, they plant it on the grass, and with their 4 upper extremities, they reach out like this, and they just wait. They just wait for us, or our dogs, or whatever rodent they're choosing for their meal. But that's what they do. Interestingly, though, they can also just attach to you just from static electricity. Not that people are hiking in dresses, but if I'm walking and I do this, they could just immediately attach just from that little bout of electricity. They love pets, they love people, and so that's how they find us. One lady asked, she had heard that they often drop off of trees. They can drop off of trees, but that's not what they prefer. They prefer to be in the grass at our feet, and wherever they find us, they often crawl up to a different location. So they don't hang out where they attach to us. They'll crawl, and they'll find a better spot behind the ears, bottom, wherever they may go. You can't really see it on this, but this is a picture of the tick eggs. Ticks lay their eggs in hundreds to thousands. It's about the size of a quarter. It's bigger than any tick. They're shiny, they look like caviar. They're little tiny sticky clumps. In the rare case that you or your pet finds them, it's very important not to touch them with your bare hands, to be gloved, because believe it or not, female ticks can transmit disease to their eggs. It's rare, but it can happen. So if you ever came across eggs, it'd be important to wear gloves, and just the best way to remove them or kill them would be to pour rubbing alcohol over it. had some questions about people kind of handling them and you don't want to handle eggs. Again, it's rare that you're going to find them, but they are visible with the naked eye. So this is the cycle of life. So female ticks, lay their eggs in the spring. By the summer, they turn into larvae, which is about the size of a poppy seed, so a dot. Larvae don't usually bite humans. They're too small. They want the small rodents. But that's why Lyme disease is so prevalent, because the larvae go for the mice, and the mice are the carriers of Lyme disease. So they like mice and rats mostly. So at the larva stage, in the spring, in the early summer, they're looking for their first meal, and it's often not humans, but it's often the mice. If they get that meal, they hang out, and then they turn into nymphs the next spring. So that's why we see, for humans, we often find a lot of smaller ticks on us in the spring, because that's when the nymphs are out, the toddler ticks, so to speak. It's oftentimes also that we get Lyme disease and other diseases can get transmitted at that stage. It doesn't have to be an adult tick. So if the nymphs, find somebody to get their meal, again, they're good. And then the following year, in the early spring, the adults look for their meal, and then that's when they would lay their eggs. Ticks can survive the winter regardless. They can survive blizzards. They crawl under leaves and they lie dormant, so they just don't move. If it's above freezing, they come out and they'll look for you in trails. I found ticks on me snowshoeing. So if it is above freezing, they are out and looking. If not, they're fine. They'll just sleep until the spring. So they don't, generally speaking, terrible weather doesn't interfere with the tick's life cycle. They're not around in the winter, but that's just because they're hanging out and waiting for us. So most ticks, it's about a 2-year cycle. Female ticks love deer, hence the name deer tick. And the problem with that is, if female ticks get that last meal, they lay the eggs and then the cycle goes on. Interestingly enough, in New York City, or not New York City, but Long Island area, they're actually doing vasectomies on deer to prevent deer, and so therefore prevent further, ticks. They're not doing that in Connecticut, but it has been talked about. Just because the female ticks are, they'll choose us if there's no deer around, but they love deer. Any questions so far?
So all the talk of if we had a really good cold snap, it would kill the ticks. That's not really. Because they just bury under. I mean, if we somehow we're in a place where we removed all brush and all of that, maybe, but they just get under that brush, get under those leaves, and they can just wait it out. Yeah. They're not going to be active. They're not going to be crawling around when it's really cold. But no, generally speaking, we'll see though, because we're probably going to have a brutal winter this next winter.
Every year.
So I guess we'll see what comes. Right now we're dealing with the really warm winter, so ticks were out and about more than ever. But no, for the most part, weather's not a factor yet. So just moving into a little bit, there's more than one type of tick in Connecticut. The deer tick is the most serious because of Lyme disease and babesiosis. So Connecticut, we have a long season, April through October, but again, they can be around in other months as well. We're the top 20%. We have Lyme named after us. In the 1970s, both adults and children were getting weird arthritic symptoms, which maybe in older adults, that's not unheard of, but with kids, you were never seeing that. And that's kind of what pushed Connecticut to further pursue what was going on, and eventually got to the Lyme disease diagnosis, which is really interesting. Ticks have always been around, but it wasn't until the 70s that we first found out what Lyme was, and really not till the 90s or early 2000s where we were testing. There wasn't much I mean, I grew up in the 90s, and as a kid, I don't even remember too much talk of ticks. The most 3 common ticks in the state are the black-legged deer tick, which is what's responsible for both Lyme disease and babesiosis, which are the 2 big diseases here in Connecticut. But there's also the Lone Star tick and American dog tick, and they also can transmit other disease, though rare. Powassan virus disease. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but there's already been 4 cases of that in Connecticut this season. And that's pretty serious. That's pretty serious. In terms of the percentage breakdown, of all of our ticks that get submitted, 83.6% are the black-legged deer tick, 13% are the dog tick, and 3% are the Lone Star tick. The Lone Star tick we really hadn't heard of until a few years ago, but again, with the warmer weather, Lone Star ticks are leaving Texas and coming up to New England. They're mostly predominantly in the southern states on the eastern border, but now they're coming up, and every year we're seeing more and more Lone Star ticks. Any questions?
I thought I heard those being, and I don't know if it's the same illness, but the Lone Star ticks being associated with an illness that would cause like almost being allergic.
Red meat allergy, yes. Alpha-gal syndrome, yep, that's correct. Yeah, we're gonna touch base on that for sure. Yeah, right? You're hearing a lot of interviews these days about that. So there have been many individuals who have had that weird reaction, but nobody knew what it was, but now they do, and so all these people are telling their stories. But yeah, it is serious. It is a thing, and it's obviously a miserable thing to have if you like red meat. It can also affect dairy and glycerin. But first, black-legged deer ticks, they got their name because they prefer large animals such as deer, but will bite humans and for all that's around. This is interesting. I actually didn't know this until this summer, but deer are immune to Lyme disease. Deer have nothing to do with transmission of Lyme disease. They can't acquire Lyme disease. The biggest problem with deer is they are just a meal, and again, they're that female tick's meal, and that's putting the cycle, for another round. They can carry other diseases too, anaplasmosis, which we do see here, and Powassan virus disease. Again, rare, but it is out there. Pretty much all tick disease present similar symptoms to begin with, kind of generalized fatigue, muscle aches, fever. The big thing is with Lyme disease, 80% of cases will get that bullseye rash, but there's still 20% that don't. So the biggest thing is, early testing, or if you don't have testing available, just treating without testing. That's the discretion, of course, of the provider. But most doctors here in Connecticut are pretty aggressive in terms of, finding the profile of their patient and deciding what to do. So the Lone Star tick, they're the most aggressive biter. They say that, while we often don't notice tick bites, if you are going to notice one, it usually would be from a Lone Star tick because it hurts. It hurts. They do not carry Lyme disease, thankfully, but they do carry other diseases, and some of you may have heard of Ehrlichia. We do get cases of that here. It often presents with a very high fever. It's the same treatment as Lyme disease. You get the same antibiotic, but it's a little bit more of a serious condition. I should note that while Lyme disease is serious and can cause chronic symptoms for a long time, it is not deadly. It is not deadly. But Ehrlichia and tularemia both can be deadly. The red meat allergy, also known as alpha-gal syndrome, is interesting. It truly, the tick bites you and it disposes of sugar in our bloodstream, and for whatever reason, that triggers a red meat allergy. It can also trigger dairy, not as common. But what stinks is, while most of the time the allergy is mild, it's not anaphylaxis. Most of the time it's a mild allergy reaction. You can't treat it because almost every medication on the market to treat allergies has a component of red meat in it. So the only thing you can do is avoid all products. So that stings. Lone Star ticks also can produce something called STARI, Southern Tick Associated Rash Illness. It looks almost exactly like Lyme disease. The biggest difference is it doesn't cause chronic symptoms. It's a lot less harmful, and it's a more pronounced rash, so it's more circular, it's sharper, whereas Lyme disease rashes can be a little bit more vague, a little bit more dispersed. But we do see this rash here as well. You really a provider wouldn't be able to, eye it, naked eye it and say, oh yeah, that's definitely STARI and not Lyme. Again, thankfully the treatment would be the same in terms of antibiotic for both. but Lyme disease, can cause chronic symptoms where this Lone Star ticks can't prevent or can't cause chronic symptoms. You want to look? I'm going to show them these. This is the ticks. Yeah. Which one that is? Any questions? No. Last but not least, the American dog tick. They love dogs. This is the only tick that really likes to hang out in the middle of a beautifully mowed lawn. Whereas other ticks like the long grass, the dog ticks will travel anywhere. They'll come inside, they'll plant inside. They're the only tick that will plant eggs inside your house. For the most part, we're not concerned in this area about dog ticks because again, they have nothing to do with Lyme disease. But there are cases of Rocky Mountain fever and also, like the Lone Star tick, tularemia. Again, both rare, but they're serious, and there's always a possibility. These are the ticks you most likely are going to see on your dogs. They usually come in packs. You'll see a bunch of them. And again, it's one of the recommendations is to keep your yard well groomed, but dog ticks don't really care. So it's interesting. There's, still, they're the number 2 tick, so they're still out there, but not as much as
They're huge.
deer ticks. They are, yes. Yes.
You did a dog hat.
They are.
Next time we get one, Teddy, I'll bring it over.
Yes, so the deer ticks, an adult female is about 2 to 2.5 millimeters, which is like half the size of your pinky nail, if that. The Lone Star tick is bigger, 3 to 4 millimeters. And then the American dog tick, I think can reach up to 5 to 7, is that what it says? Millimeters at the top?
Yes, 5
Yeah.
to 15.
5 to 15, there you go. Yeah, so the dog ticks are the largest. They're the most visible.
They're engorged too, they're just, yeah.
Yes, yep. Any of these ticks will engorge. Any of these ticks will attach and suck your blood. So just, to touch base briefly on Lyme disease, it's caused by the bacteria from the American deer tick. We've talked about a lot of this. The most common symptom, characteristically with Lyme disease is the bullseye rash. 20% of cases do not have a rash. 20%, that's pretty large. Other symptoms, again, fever, headache, fatigue. 60% of Lyme disease goes on to become chronic. So it's important to, of course, get treated right away, but even with an antibiotic, sometimes it still can become a chronic disease. It can affect pretty much every organ in the body. Cardiovascular, muscular, nervous system are the big ones. And it is serious. The only way to, again, avoid it is prevention. But we see, I can't give numbers out because it's not, there's no technical, we haven't put out a report yet, but we're seeing a lot. Again, more than ever, they're just coming in buckets. And the cases we're seeing are the cases that are blood tested. So there's more cases out there that are not blood tested. These are the ones that, have been tested, which maybe is 60% of Lyme disease cases. Okay, so why are there more ticks? The biggest factor, of course, is climate change, warmer winters, increased gases. This is really interesting. I didn't know this, but in 2021, there was what was called an oak tree bumper crop. And with the changes in weather and whatnot, for whatever reason, these oak trees were angry and they dropped more acorns. What did that do? It increased rodents coming to the trees. What did that do? It increased ticks. So right now, so this was, the spring of 2021. So now we're 2 years later, we're at the end of that cycle. So right now we're seeing the adult female ticks that were babies when this happened, and that they're thinking that this is a big part of the reason why we're seeing more ticks now. But it's the first meal again is not usually us; it's the little mice, and that's usually what can transmit the disease. Most of these ticks get it early. They're not getting Lyme disease as an adult; they're getting it when they're little. All right, so prevention. The most effective way to avoid a tick-borne disease is to prevent a tick bite. Recommendations include wearing light clothing, long sleeves, long pants, tucking it into your socks, Using insect repellents, that's, recommended by the EPA. There's a lot out there, like you can go in the EPA's list and kind of feed in what you're interested in, and we'll give you lists and lists of different repellents. An important takeaway is, DEET is usually what's recommended, though, if you have dogs, it's recommended to avoid DEET around dogs, so it can be tricky. So I say that every time, I would say that the biggest thing is when you come inside, after being inside, you do a tick check immediately. Because as I mentioned earlier, ticks might bite you, you might come in and find some latched onto you. But again, if it's been less than 24 hours, the risk of disease is really, really low, really low. So if we're, diligent about coming in and immediately doing a tick check, that's really important. Granted, we can't see everything, so, it would be recommended that you just hop in the shower if you're by yourself, and, kind of go from there. And change your clothes, of course. You can hire somebody to spray the perimeters of your yard. Some, trails and parks in the area, do that for us. It was hard for me to find numbers on who does it, but it is a big expense, but that is an option. I know some people with bigger yards do that. It's just kind of a fun acronym to help you remember: bathe and shower, look for ticks, apply repellent, spray your yard, treat your pets. Lucky for dogs and cats, they have more, preventative medications than we do. So both cats and dogs, there's a transdermal solution you can apply in their skin that helps. And dogs, there's a Lyme disease vaccination. So that's interesting and important. And important also if you come inside with your dogs to check your dogs. So this is a very interesting, recently talked about hack. Has anybody heard of the tick tubes? Yeah? Okay, cool. So essentially it's paper towel, toilet paper rolls, empty, filled with soaked cotton balls and permethrin. Permethrin is it's actually used to treat scabies, but it's often used to repel insects in various forms. You can actually buy clothes that have been treated with permethrin. They have about 60 washes in them. So if you are like an avid hiker, it'd be recommended that you just buy those clothes. Anyway, with the tick tubes, you would soak it, you'd buy the solution, or you can buy a spray bottle with it. You'd soak the cotton balls with gloves on, and then you'd stuff it, and then essentially line the perimeter of your yard. You could also, if you know of a spot where rodents hang out, you could put it there too. This solution is not necessarily killing the ticks, but the mice and the rodents come, they like the cotton balls to build their nests, and that contact with the cotton balls, when the ticks come to them, the ticks die. It's interesting. I printed out some of these little note cards for how you can do it yourself. You guys sound like you already do it, but it's interesting. And I believe the library actually made some kits for you if you want them to take home. Yeah. One big takeaway though to note is it's fine for dogs, but it is highly toxic with cats. So if you're handling it, just kind of make sure your cat's not nearby. They say once the solution is dried, it's not as big of a deal. But if it's wet, like if you're soaking it and the cats came, they could get really sick. So just keep that in mind. Any questions?
No.
No questions yet? Okay. Just moving on to tick removal. One of the most important things is not to squeeze. You want to get that tick at the base of the head and you want to pull directly up. It often is helpful if you're using tweezers. Wherever the tick is, you take 2 fingers around where the tick is and apply a little bit of pressure that way. That helps taut the skin and keep it firm. So with applying that pressure, then you take the tweezers in your dominant hand and pull up. Yes. Oh, that's it. Practicing. There's actually a really fun tool on the CDC's website called Tick Bite Bot. Remember during COVID, they had all the little tools like, okay, I tested positive, now what do I do kind of things. So they have one for ticks, and it walks you through how to remove a tick step by step. It's very interesting. Again, it's important to really try and keep the tick intact. If you want, there's an option to send your tick in for testing. In that case, it's not so important if it's dead or alive, but that the torso, the body is intact. You would just drop it in a little plastic baggie, and you can take it to our office. We're at the Mansfield Town Hall, and for our towns, we mail them out for you. And we've been busy this summer with that, but we're happy to do it. So I printed out some of our forms. So you just fill out this form with your tick, bring it to our office, and that's about it. Yeah. So it is an option. If you're not going to send it in for testing, I want to keep saying texting. Testing, in order to kill it, Scotch tape works fine. Putting in a piece of tape, closing it, throwing it in the trash. Pouring it or dropping it in rubbing alcohol works too. Flushing down the toilet works. To my knowledge, though, a lady did tell me a few weeks ago that she saw one crawl out. I don't know. But it is still on the CDC's website that you can flush it down the toilet. But I don't know about crawling out. That seems eerie. But those are all options. After tick removal, I think we just kind of touch base on all of this. Biggest thing to think about after you remove a tick is signs and symptoms. Not only can they, but they often take up to 30 days to show up. I recently had a gentleman who did not even get the rash until day 30. I mean, it's a full month. It's a long time. We forget, our lives are busy. It's a full month. So it's important to try your best to think and watch out for symptoms. I always say, since symptoms other than the rash are so vague and happening, how often do you, I have fatigue every day, right? But I recommend that it's in a change from your baseline. So whatever your aches and pains are, kind of from your baseline, if you have a change in that during the summer, if you've been out, doing some gardening or out on the trails, you should be thinking about ticks. As I said, with doctors, there's still a lot of gray. Every physician's very different, but it's important to establish a good relationship with your primary care. And oftentimes, if you're touching base with them and you're explaining, hey, I have symptoms, I've been out in the yard a lot doing this, there's a chance they might actually just prophylactically treat you, and not force you to go in for the testing, or they might test you, but they might start treating you before. So it's important to be vocal with your doctors or urgent care. Urgent care has actually been really on top of this as well, and just having a good connection there, because treatment is important. Any questions? No. Okay. So that's pretty much it. You guys are my quiet audience. So kind of a lot in a small, crammed in slideshow, but ticks are not going away. Ticks are endemic in Connecticut. So the only thing we really can do is prevent, them biting us, and keeping an eye out on ourselves to make sure, that we don't get disease. And again, if every day, if we're diligent about looking at our skin, we're in pretty good shape. There's other hacks like the permethrin and DEET and stuff like that help us. But looking at our skin and pulling out, obviously, a tick if it's bit us immediately, is a good spot to be at. And that's it.
So, I know I heard at some point about them working on an actual human vaccine.
Yes.
I know it's continuing.
Yeah. So,
to your knowledge?
no, I don't think we're gonna. In terms of when are we gonna see that on the market? Personally, I don't think anytime soon. I'm talking in a 2 to 3 year range. There was a Lyme vaccine on the market in the 1990s. It got pulled in 2002. The reason being is kind of vague. They said it wasn't very effective, but there's also kind of some talk that it just wasn't. Nobody was really getting it, so the commercial value wasn't there for it, and that was part of the reason. But yeah, they are still. But in terms of the top vaccines we're hearing about now, it's really all flu, COVID, and RSV. There's Lyme. I haven't heard the word Lyme vaccine in any of the Department of Public Health calls now. They are working on it, but in terms of coming out soon. It
With
doesn't.
increasing numbers, maybe.
Right, yeah. It doesn't seem likely, but you never know. I mean, maybe next spring it'll be ready to go, but we haven't heard anything. There's really been no talk about it this summer, unfortunately. But hopefully that's coming sooner rather than later. But right now we're stuck with these fun measures. Yes.
I've heard varying hours and minutes as far as when there is a tick on you.
Yeah.
The new one with the red meat, I heard just 15 minutes. Other types of ticks, I guess, that we've had around for a while, I've heard 24 to 48 hours. How do you know when it's if they're not engorged and you can take it out with a tool or tweezers, is that an indication that it's not a detriment to your well-being, or should you go get it checked out anyway?
So if it's not engorged, meaning it hasn't bit you, but it's just crawling on you, disease is pretty much zero.
Okay.
If it's bit you, so if it's intact, and
Yeah.
not crawling, you're right. There's some different opinions in terms of the red meat allergy, like with the Lone Star ticks in general, with a lot of the tick-borne diseases outside of Lyme, we don't know as much as we know about Lyme. So I think that there's still a variability in terms of how long it takes. I haven't even heard that some say only 15 minutes for that. Is that what you said, 15 minutes?
For the newest
For the red,
one.
yeah.
Yeah,
So there hasn't been enough, time, I think, to really research that enough to give a solid answer. In terms of Lyme disease, I'm talking mainly about Lyme disease and babesiosis, 24 hours would be pretty much the bare minimum needed. So they say for the most part 36 to 48, there's still a small chance of disease after 24 hours. Before 24 hours, in terms of Lyme disease, you're in a pretty good spot in terms of, very low risk of getting disease if you pulled that tick off you before 24 hours. Does that make sense?
yeah.
But with some of the other, like the red meat allergy, I don't think not enough is known yet, in terms of how long needed for that to be triggered, because that's a little bit different, obviously, than the others.
So when I was referring to engorged versus just biting,
Yeah.
you can tell when a tick has been sucking the blood, but if it looks like it, is not just crawling around and in your skin, but you can get it out head intact and all that.
Yeah, so if you need a tool to remove the tick, chances are that it's engorged. So, sometimes I'll find little ticks just crawling, and I could either, and I shouldn't, but you can flick it off, or pick it up and dispose of it. But if you need something to pull it out, or if it's really stuck in that one spot, chances are that it is on its way to a meal or in the middle of a meal. Yeah. With the very small baby ticks, it can be hard to tell, right? Because the ones that are as small as like a poppy seed or a sesame seed, that can be a little bit more tricky. An adult female, usually, you have a good eye and you can see it. It gets pretty big, actually. It's interesting. If you catch one at the end of its meal,
Yeah.
we've had people bring them in. They're pretty blown up.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it's not moving around and you need some sort of tool to remove it, I would say that's a safe bet that it's engorged, which means a risk of disease.
Do you still get rashes with those little pinpoint ones?
With the little, like a pinpoint rash?
Yeah. Do you still get rashes with the little minute ticks?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know what they would look like if
You're
because they're
talking
very
about
hard to- the really tiny ones.
like the baby ticks?
I don't know. Is there a different?
So with which disease? So with Ehrlichia, which can be transmitted to us from the Lone Star tick, then you can get little tiny red dot patches. So there are certain tick-borne diseases that can cause a little reactive rashes. Also, our skin is, every individual is different in terms of their skin. Sometimes just removing a tick or using a tool can cause some sort of little rash.
Yeah.
In terms of Lyme disease, it's a pretty specific bullseye type rash. But yeah, there are a few other random rashes with more rare but serious diseases. So Ehrlichia can produce that. Tularemia is very rare, but that would actually, that causes swollen lymph nodes, and it can actually cause open wounds. Again, very rare. But in terms of the red splotchy rash, the only one I know of, for that in terms of a disease would be the Ehrlichia, which isn't the deer tick, that's the Lone Star tick. Yeah. But again, the symptoms are so, diverse and so random. It's, it can be tricky if somebody presents to an ER or an urgent care with very vague symptoms. They're probably going to do a whole tick panel to test and see what's going on. Some can cause a very high fever, and again, our immune systems react so differently to all viruses that it's really hard to pinpoint or diagnose just based on symptoms alone. You really need a test when there's that many variables.
But if you've already had Lyme and you get bit a second or third time later on, then
the positive antibodies.
there's no test that really is going to be worthwhile, right?
If you had a second Lyme infection and you had a recent infection of Lyme in the past few years, you'll still have antibodies that show up positive for Lyme. That will be, again, to the discretion of the provider, but they're probably going to just treat you for Lyme if you present like that. They might test you for other diseases just to rule out, other tick-borne illnesses, because Lyme's not the only one. But yeah, they probably, even if your test came back obviously reactive, they probably would treat you. Yeah.
So you said only a 2 or 3 year span.
I believe
it doesn't
so.
last longer than that as far as the testing goes?
In terms of our body, how long we carry those antibodies from a Lyme infection, I believe it's approximately 2 to 3 years, but I don't know for sure. Talk with your provider about that. It could be longer. Again, our antibodies and immune systems are all different. I know personally, I had Lyme in 2014, and then in 2016, I was still seeing the positive tests. But I don't know if there's like an exact number. I think every infectious disease doctor has a little bit of a different opinion. They can also test other antibodies and see how you react. There's all kinds of crazy IgG, IgA testing out there that they can do. But in the regard, if you had a recent Lyme infection, say in the past decade, again, communication with your doctor, they should be able to kind of take the right steps to still get you treated. Yeah. But I don't know if the 2 to 3 years is concrete. That's just kind of what I've heard before.
And is this a fallacy? I heard that cats cannot, when they're bitten by ticks, cannot get Lyme disease.
Yeah, so it's very uncommon to hear that ticks have Lyme disease.
Cats,
Cats.
Yeah.
not ticks.
What did I say?
You said ticks.
Ticks have Lyme disease.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, it's very common to hear about cats having Lyme disease. I don't know how often they test them. Most cats are, for the most part, indoor. So I don't know. If you look it up, it's a little bit gray. There's no kind of hard answer in terms of, yes or no. Dogs definitely can. I would say yes, cats can get tick-borne diseases, but it's more rare. And I don't know how often, they're not probably testing cats very often for these diseases. Definitely not as much as humans or dogs. And like I said, there's still that transdermal treatment that they can apply in their skin for cats who are out and about for both mosquito-borne
For prevention.
For prevention.
Right, but
Yeah. But in terms of
Once
actual
bitten,
positive
yeah.
cases, I don't know.
yeah.
I haven't heard of many. I haven't done too much research into it, but now I will. But yeah, they're not as talked about as dogs, that's
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
But I still think that there is a chance.
Really?
Again, more rare, yeah. But ticks don't like cats as much. Ticks prefer to bite other creatures more than they like cats. So I think that's partly also why we don't hear so much about, Lyme disease connections with cats, because they're not getting bit to the same degree as other rodents, humans, etc.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have cats?
I had a cat that I didn't realize had a tick that was engorged.
Okay.
And she lived another like 4 or 5 years after that was removed. She has long hair, and I didn't see it, and it was, up, in back of her
Yep,
ear and
yep.
stuff like that, and just on an exam one time at the vet, they said, that looks like a tick. And I said, oh my God, I don't even know how long it's been there.
Right, yeah.
And
keep in
then I
mind,
heard that they don't get it, which I was really surprised about.
keep in mind, not every tick that is engorged, for even 48 hours is gonna, if they don't have disease, they won't transmit it. So, not all ticks have disease. It's just a wide amount of them do. But yeah, I just know that cats are less likely to get bit, less likely to get disease, but I don't know if I don't know if they're immune to Lyme disease. I haven't ever heard that they're immune to it, like deer are. But I don't know, I'll have to look into that. Yeah. There's still a lot of kind of gray in the tick world as well. In terms of, most of the time if you ask somebody about the American dog tick, they would say, oh, you don't worry about it, it doesn't transmit disease. It does transmit disease, it's just very rare and it's not Lyme disease. So, it depends on, who you're talking to and kind of, what's going on. And we're also just learning so much, like all this stuff with the alpha-gal syndrome, the red meat allergy. This is the first year that I've ever heard it, in the news headlines. So just every year we're learning more and talking more about, other aspects that we hadn't heard of, including the, the tick tubes with the permethrin that you can line in your yard. So, yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
I did have one question about one of the PowerPoints. It mentioned that ticks does survive in the winter regardless, so how do they get by? Just curious.
So, in the cold times, they bury under the leaves, and they actually, what's called lie dormant, so play dead. So they just lie flat, they don't move, and they just wait it out.
Oh.
Because remember, ticks only need 3 meals in their lifetime to survive. So they're not hungry. If they got their blood meal in the fall or in the summer, they can last through the winter. Yeah, so they really, and so the winter's over, and then the tick will, change into its, next cycle, and then move on and look for that meal.
Okay, good to
Yeah.
know then.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's eerie, but interesting. Yeah, yeah. But they don't need much, but that one meal's enough, and there's so many of them.
Wow.
And then keep in mind, again, if the females get their last meal, they're laying thousands of eggs. So then it's just starting the cycle over. Yeah. All right.
It's amazing how you don't even feel them walking on it.
I know. Yeah, that's why you almost need somebody else to be looking and looking for you, because we don't feel them. Especially if they're in an area that's not visible, they'll go to the armpits, behind the neck. You really need to do a thorough tick check or have somebody else's eyes on you. Which I didn't mention earlier, and I should have, but kids are the most vulnerable, especially in the 9-year-old range, so to speak, but they're the most vulnerable for Lyme disease and tick bites. So it's a lot of kids are in a lot of camps throughout the summer and things like that, and it's really important when they come home to getting a look at their skin to make sure, because there's all kinds of fun wilderness camp stuff going on. So yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming. And thanks for your questions. I'm going to do some research and see if I can find any more out about the cats.
And so I have the DIY kits for you all if you want to try. So we've got a toilet tube, toilet paper roll tube, a plastic glove for you in there, and then there's cotton balls that were soaked in permethrin and laid out to dry. So they say it's okay to touch stuff that's been soaked in permethrin if it's totally dry.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure they're completely dry yet, so they're wrapped in saran. You can let them lay out for a little bit, make sure they're all the way dry, or use the glove. And so you guys, everybody can take one. And I think you have.
Yeah, I handed out the little.
Oh, perfect. So now you know how you can make your own.
Yes.
And try them out. But this will be one at least to kind of get you started and.
Yeah.
When would you do it? I think you put like what, like 2/3?
Yeah, yeah.
Two-thirds in there,
Approximately
so they
3 to
can-
4 cotton balls.
Yeah.
And if you can use paper towel rolls too, and just cut it into thirds, if you prefer to do that. But you want to essentially, have it shallow enough for the mice to reach it, and so they can take it out of their nest. Yeah. So,
Is there
Fingers
any other
crossed,
benefit
start,
from it, too? Will the mice,
just that the only benefit really is for ticks, but just that the mice take the cotton balls and lay their nests, and
does it hurt the baby
mice.
when they're born?
No, it doesn't. No, the mice.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't even hurt the mice. It's the mice.
Just the ticks?
Yeah, just the ticks. So yeah, the mice are actually okay. It's all through the skin. So when the mice are handling it with their skin, it's very interesting. If the ticks later on bite their skin, that's what kills them. Yeah. Really, in terms of animals around, cats are the only one to kind of pay attention to. And they say if it's dried, you're okay. It's really just when it's wet. So if you're making your own and you have the wet permethrin, you want to keep your cats away. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.